right, welcome to the Logosphere. This is Chris Stites, here as always with J.D. Roof.
Hello, good evening.
And this evening we are going to discuss the Grand Inquisitor, which is a famous chapter out of a famous book by a famous author that I have right here.
Yeah, put it in the camera.
Dostoyevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, his last final work that he wrote, and it's gargantuan. And there's one, for those of you who do not know, there's one solitary chapter about a quarter of the way through the book that is titled The Grand Inquisitor, and for some reason it has become a notable chapter, a bit of a standalone chapter. I think people read it, dissect it, try to analyze it on its own for its own philosophical merits. And recently J.D. has subjected himself to the
audiobook,
almost masochistic endeavor of listening to 62 hours of Dostoyevsky via Audible or whatever your platform is.
Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting thing because in the Audible, it has a little, maybe we could just give a little background, but it was originally supposed to be a children's book, which it's so wild because there is like a children's kind of orphanage kind of story, like helping kids. And that was the original endeavor that Dostoyevsky had. And it turned into this like amalgamation of just arguments about God and atheism and, depravity and alcoholism. And I mean, they even talk about delirium tremens at times. And it just it goes like through all these depths of like different human element. And the brothers in the book, there's three brothers, and the chapter we're going to get into it's between Ivan and Alyosha. And Ivan is the atheist, right? But that's his big secret. He's the atheist. He's very smart, they call him he's a clever man. And Alyosha is like a monk, but a monk in training. And so they kind of are coming from this argument.
And who's the third brother?
The third brother is
Dmitri or
Dmitri. They call him Mitri.
What's his get down?
His get down is he's kind of in the middle from what I could take from him. He's driven by his passions. He's almost like what Plato would say is the one that just goes with the wind kind of. He's really smart too, but he can't, like, he falls in love with somebody and he just can't have enough. He wants to, drink and just party and just.
He's the Dionysian brother.
He's kind of the Dionysian brother. And the funny thing is the atheist brother Ivan is a little bit like that too, but he's a little bit more reserved. He's a little smarter.
Is he the oldest?
He's the oldest, I believe. And then Alyosha is
the youngest.
I believe he's the youngest or the middle, but he's in a monastery with these monks, and his monk is about to die. So they're having this conversation, and Alyosha wants to go have. There's this whole backstory to it. We won't get into that, but they're having this conversation in a room at an inn that his brother's staying at, and there's a lot of family dynamics going on, and it's a poem. It's basically supposed to be a poema or whatever. That's what he says. And Ivan's like, yeah, here's a poem I wrote about, and I'm not a scholar. I was a horrible student.
Kind of plays it down.
He plays it down big time. And then he releases this tyrant of, it's almost like a defense for atheism, right? In a weird way, but almost like a defense for the devil, like worship, not like the devil, like the horny the horny beast, but that is kind of mentioned too. But it's really.
Can I give a synopsis of the story?
Yeah, give a synopsis.
So my reading of the poem is basically that this takes place during the Spanish Inquisition, when they're burning heretics at the stake. We're in Seville, which is I think a town or city in Spain, and you have the Grand Cardinal Inquisitor, and you have this scene where, the day before, I think 100 or more people were sentenced to death by burning by the Grand Inquisitor. And now it's the next day, and Christ enters the scene, and it's the resurrected, the second coming. Jesus in human form once again comes to earth, and everyone notices his presence. There's something about him. And he starts to do his thing. He starts to perform miracles. And the Grand Inquisitor sees this, sees it all happen, walks up and has him arrested, thrown in prison, and then comes to meet him in prison. And the bulk of the poem is what the Grand Inquisitor has to tell Christ in prison. And essentially what he has to tell him is, I know who you are, and tomorrow I'm going to have you burned at the stake, and this is why I'm doing the right thing in doing so. Here's my argument.
Right. And the interesting thing is so just to go back to, Christ is now on earth, and 100 people have just been burned, and everybody knows it's Christ. That's the interesting thing. It's something about his eyes and his presence and his heart full of love, or whatever. There's a phrase to that. But it's something about how he's got he's like God's son, basically, walking on earth, and it kind of shines through. And another thing to kind of hammer that home, he actually resurrects in the scene while the Grand Inquisitor is watching. He resurrects a dead child, which is kind of interesting because Dostoyevsky, he lost his child. That's an interesting kind of point. His child died from, I don't know what the disease was. It was part of a critique at the end of the book in the audible version. And so I think it's his couple-year-old kid died. It's not a pretty scene, like pretty bad. And he, so the writer, just as a backstory, he's coming from that kind of madness, I would say, because that would be a maddening, event for anybody, especially a parent that loves their kid, right? But it's interesting that Jesus comes in, and the kid's in the coffin, dead. Like, there's no question, like, it's some trick. And he resurrects this. He also cures a blind man. The scales fall from his eyes, and he can see again. So the Grand Inquisitor...
The kid has some white flowers
in
its hand.
Right.
Comes to life. Its parent is, just beside themselves.
Right, with joy, and I can't believe it. When Jesus resurrects him, and the Grand Inquisitor is scowling the entire time watching this. So it's like, just in case you don't know this is Jesus, you really know it's Jesus now, right? Because he can perform.
And we know that he knows that it's Jesus.
Right.
Even though later on he has some other sort of cryptic comments he makes, which is like, I don't know if that's who you are or who it isn't. It really makes no difference to me. He says certain things.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess like the first kind of contention is we were kind of discussing this prior to this, but what do you think Dostoyevsky is trying to get at this point? Like, what do you think is he wrestling with God, his own beliefs? Is he writing it down? Like it's almost like a thought. I always think of it as like a thought experiment. Let's set the scenario. All right, here's God, and like here's not God, and let's battle it out.
Yeah.
And who wins? Who wins at the end, right? Kind of thing. Like, test these premises out. Do you think that's what he was up to?
I think that's why Dostoevsky in particular is, a lot of times he's categorized with philosophers of the time.
Right, but he also says that he wasn't a good philosopher.
Yeah.
That is something from his mouth.
As any good philosopher would.
Yeah.
But more than, some of the others. I mean, Sartre, Kafka, are some people, that came, Sartre was a little bit later, but other authors who wrote fiction who are all sort of also thought of as philosophers. But Dostoevsky very much so is thought of in that way, but I don't know if he wrote any strict philosophy.
This is probably the strictest philosophy he wrote, this chapter. A lot of people say that.
And of course, I keep going back to this, but we've been wrestling with Nietzsche recently.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's parallels. Nietzsche and Dostoevsky wrote at a similar time think Dostoevsky was his predecessor, but not by a lot. And from what I've read, Nietzsche was a big fan of Dostoevsky to the extent that he really read him and absorbed him. It's not clear, but there were some letters that he wrote to some of his buddies where he, really praises Dostoevsky.
Which is a big nod, right?
Yeah.
Coming from Nietzsche, because that dude, he destroys anybody he comes in.
Yeah.
It comes in his path. But Dostoevsky, he praises.
Yeah.
And I think that's what kind of bloomed me into this book, because I'm a big Nietzschean fan. And it's just like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
Like, what is he writing about?
And of course, Nietzsche, you read him and he's, he gets criticized sometimes for being self-contradictory, that he'll pose one thing in one, at one time and then pose something different at another time in one aphorism or another. But one thing that he's probably doing is he's having these things contend with each other. And in a different way, Dostoevsky is like doing that, but in a literary narrative way, which is what any good movie or television show, they do these things to some extent or another as well.
Right.
These different characters, there's the protagonist and the antagonist. And of course, to talk about children's books, for children, it's okay to have very flat, static characters where you have the good guy and you have the bad guy, you have the witch and you have the prince or whatever it is. And so it's kind of clear who's who. And of course, as stories get more sophisticated, then you have these more complex characters. Is evil in some ways, is flawed in many ways.
As a rebel.
Yeah, is a rebel, doesn't play by the rules, is unpredictable even to themselves, but has all of these other characteristics which are admirable. And so you have these characters that are complex. And so I think, and they represent sometimes, I think you can find movies where you have characters, and I wish I could call one to mind, but like the chaos and order, those simple concepts you see in movies a lot, I think.
Yin and the yang.
Yeah, even like I'm thinking of Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins is a bit of a children's story, so it's not that deep. But essentially, you have, I don't know, have you seen it?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. You got the kids, and they live with the dad, and he's the banker, and everything is everyone's got to button up straight and stand up straight, and everything's on time. And everything is really well ordered, and then all of a sudden you have Mary Poppins blow into town,
right?
And she represents chaos in this instance, right? And so you have order and you have chaos kind of contend with each other, and then hopefully at the end of the movie, there's in a good movie there's been I think an evolution of both,
right?
And there's a bit of a synthesis, right?
Hegel.
In that, probably more, it's more that chaos teaches order a lesson, which I think is oftentimes the easier lesson for Hollywood to represent, is that you have...
Yeah, I mean, but they also have the chalk painting where they go into the chalk painting, and that's kind of like, it's getting really artistic and abstract.
Yeah.
But they have to get out of that.
Yeah.
Like you can't, and the rain comes and washes it away. So, it's like there's this weird kind of cycle going on.
I thought a couple good ones that, a lot of times I noticed that it seems like chaos has a lesson for order to learn. But some, what is it? Alice in Wonderland is a good example of, and that's interesting because that type of, that theme, that aesthetic is very appealing to, psychedelia.
Right, of course.
And which
going
is,
down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, which is openness, and which is left of center, and which is all those things. But really the lesson that I see, for lack of a better terms, in Alice in Wonderland is one of warning when it comes to chaos. Yeah, and
I mean, she is crying a lot in that movie, like right from the get-go. When she falls down the rabbit hole, she can't even get through the first hole.
and she's bored by order, right?
Yeah,
she has the lesson. Her sister's teaching her the lesson by the tree, and she's just bored, and she'd rather be doing anything else. And then she follows the rabbit down the hole.
The rabbit with the watch.
Yeah,
which is totally like, what? A rabbit doesn't have a watch. Yeah,
yeah, and then it's just whatever. Finally, to make it back.
Yeah,
Wizard of Oz is another one. I think that has a similar
kind of thing.
But you have these different characters that represent different viewpoints, and they hash it out.
That's probably a good leadway into. So, what do you think the character? So Alyosha obviously represents God, good orderly direction, right? The order.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if he does. To me, Alyosha, and I haven't read The Brothers Karamazov, where I've read not much of it, and it's been a long time.
Well, but in the greater context, he is the guy that everybody, like, all the women in the story, everybody looks to him as like, he's the guy. Like, he's got his shit together. He's so good.
He's the good boy.
He's the good. He's like, he goes to the monastery. He goes and he'll give you the shirt off his back. He works with children. Actually, the end of the book ends with him with these orphans that are really troubled, and he's like the guy who, like, the speech he makes. It's called like the speech from the stone. It's a really, really cool passage. We could probably get into that too, on another show. But he's like the guy who kind of gets everybody together and feel that, like, brotherly love and God, and like he is that. He does.
Is he full of shit?
No, he's not. He actually lives
means it.
He means it.
He's not a charlatan.
No. He's actually the one character from what I 'cause it's a long book, but he's never corrupted really. He's appalled by
I can imagine
his brother's argument.
The book of his that I dove the deepest into was The Idiot. And The Idiot, you have a character called Prince Mishkin, but the basic premise is it's almost like I thought The Idiot was a bit of almost like a prototype for Forrest Gump. In Forrest Gump, you have, he's an idiot, right? But he's actually the only noble character in the whole.
Mentally handicapped, okay.
Differently abled.
Differently abled.
He's differently abled, but he's.
Is that really a thing?
Huh?
Differently abled?
Yeah.
Is that the proper?
I don't know. We'll have to.
Because back when we were kids, it was like, oh, he's a retard.
Yeah,
we
know you can't say that.
You can't say that.
I even have to censor that from the show. Especially if you use a hard R like that.
A hard R. What's up with that hard R? Yeah. So
differently abled.
But different. But I wonder what the Russian translation is of that. Is it really idiot? Like, is it translate like that?
That's a good question.
Right.
But Forrest Gump is differently abled, and he's stupid. As stupid as a stupid does.
Right.
But he's almost a Christ-like character.
Right.
Because he's got Jenny, who's like a total slut, and she's like toxic. She's probably got borderline personality disorder. She's
Wait, not slut, promiscuous.
Excuse me. Yeah. Even that, I think. Yeah.
Well, is that not even allowed anymore?
Promiscuous.
Well,
she's just
empowered woman.
She's just expressing her
inner child.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. But she's doing her thing. She was abused.
Right. She was molested by her father. Yeah.
And Gump is all about her, but she just, she keeps leaving him in the dust.
Yeah.
And he's
the bad boy.
Yeah. But he's never embittered. He always just wants to see her safe.
Right.
He always can't wait to see her again. He doesn't hold a resentment. And then there's like Lieutenant Dan, who's about to kill himself from alcoholism.
Right.
And by being in contact with him, he's by the
changed.
By the end of the movie, he's got titanium. He's got new legs.
He's saved.
He's saved.
He's saved. Christ saved
and Bubba, he, on the shores, trying to save his friend. Not trying to save the whole troop. He just wants to save his one friend. And in doing so, he, gets a medal because he saves.
Oh, and he saves pretty much everybody.
Pretty much everybody. Yeah. And it goes on and on.
Yeah.
Right? It's not exactly, but in The Idiot, you have Prince Mishkin, who is... he's an idiot, I think, in the way that actually another fun fact about Dostoevsky is he famously had epilepsy. He had some sort of epileptic condition. And
so that's Smirnikov in this book.
Okay.
He actually has epilepsy, which is they call him the lackey, and he's the brother that actually commits the murder. Spoiler alert. But it's the atheist. It's Nikolai, right? Or
Ivan.
Ivan. It's Ivan that is almost the cause, right? So Ivan, the one that is giving this story, this poema on the Grand Inquisitor. This is something within, like, he really truly believes this, and that's why I think Alyosha is in this. Going back to the Grand Inquisitor, that's why he's so repelled from it. His reaction. He doesn't have any, words of wisdom really. He's just like, oh my God, what are you like? You really believe this? Like, you really think that, Christ should be burned, and these are all the reasons why Christ should be burned? Like,
there's a bit of a naivety there, right?
Right. He's like kind of shocked that his brother is holding on to this dark secret that he doesn't believe in God. And that's like the big thing there, right?
Yeah. So there's two stories. There's one, there's the argument that's happening between Alyosha and Ivan, and then it's represented by the argument that's taking place between the Grand Inquisitor and Christ.
So what side do you fall? I mean, the problem is you can relate. Like, I feel like when you're wrestling with a concept of a higher power.
I mean, the interesting thing is that Christ says 0 words in the entire poem.
He does one thing, though.
He does one thing, but he never says a word. So there's no dialogue from him.
But there is a dialogue in description. Like he doesn't say words.
Yeah.
But
they describe
if
how
his
he
robe
looks.
touches somebody, you feel like lifted, right? He resurrects some people. He cures a guy. He's blind, and even when the Grand Inquisitor, when he kisses the Grand Inquisitor, his heart gets kind of turned in a
What
weird
is
way.
the Grand Inquisitor's argument?
So So I mean, we've been trying to pick this apart. It's pretty heavy duty stuff.
It's one paragraph. I don't know if you can, I mean, it goes on and on. There's no paragraph breaks.
It's just ongoing.
It's
talking.
page after page
of
just one, straight up Grand Inquisitor, just like mic drops left and right.
Right.
Breaking down what he has to say, which is he is justifying what is going to be his execution of what he knows to be the second coming of Christ, who is the deity that his church
was founded upon.
And he really believes, I think, that in killing Christ, he will be doing the right thing by the people. And he makes an argument that Christ, his loving message wasn't so loving after all.
He's the number one heretic. And the other thing that I think is interesting about the Grand Inquisitor is the background of him. He talks about how he also went into the desert or the wilderness and ate the locusts and kind of made himself go mad. Kind of like, the philosophers in the Greeks, right? Where Parametheus or one of those ancient philosophers would go into a cave and starve themselves for a couple of days and kind of almost like have a paranoid schizophrenic kind of episode, and then come out like enlightened, right? And that's kind of, that can go into Dionysia, and
a lot of the Indian sages,
right? Yeah, a lot of that. So he said that, like, oh, I've done your experiment, Christ.
Yeah.
I've done the same thing you've done. And I came back, kind of like the madman in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He's coming back to the town to kind of wake everybody up, right? And he's gone through kind of what Christ has gone through, and he's jaded because he realizes that humans can't handle freedom. They can't handle free choice.
But is he jaded?
Is he jaded? That's right. But like,
or is he? In a Nietzschean way, is he just the one person who was steadfast in continuing to pursue the truth and not to hide behind false idols?
Right. Because that's mentioned.
What's the way that the argument starts is he breaks down in the, I'm not an expert on like the biblical history and what happened per se, in Jesus'
But let's
story.
keep it to the story. Yeah.
But ultimately, in that way, Jesus, there was a 40 days in the desert, and during that 40 days, he was tempted by the
quote
devil.
unquote.
Yeah,
quote unquote. Because that's critiqued as well by the Grand Inquisitor.
But that's part of the Christian story.
Right.
Jesus was performing miracles and whatever, and he wandered off 40 days in the desert, and it was like dark night of the soul.
Right.
And the devil came to Jesus
and tempted
him to sell out, basically. And Jesus didn't. And that was validating to Jesus's power. And what the Grand Inquisitor says is that in the desert, what happened is that the devil asked Jesus 3 questions, and he says that they represented great truths. And he puts them in scare quotes. They have, in a sense, one way of reading it is they've been misrepresented as temptations, but
the Roman robe, right? Like what humanity needs is a leader to unify, because the whole thing about he keeps going back to it in the argument is we need one figure, not multiple idols, not multiple gods, not multiple strongmen, but one that represents God and man, and it's one uniting principle.
And it could have been Jesus.
It could have been Jesus,
and he denied it
because he was so powerful that he could perform these things and get people to move with him. He probably could have toppled the Roman Empire completely in the world,
and
right?
His argument is, had he accepted that, he would have been doing the greatest thing that he could have done for mankind in accepting it. Because, and this is a bit of a Nietzschean argument as well, most people are slaves.
They're sheep.
They're sheep.
Yeah.
And all they really want is they want something to follow. And they want to master.
So let's get into the freedom thing, right? So, because I think you have a better grasp of this. Okay. So we can't handle freedom, like to our core, like absolute freedom. And I mean freedom in the sense of like free choice.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I think that's an argument he makes over and over again, is that the prospect of actually having legitimate freedom is unbearable to people.
It's terrifying.
He talks about us as being rebels, but like a child is a rebel who clamors, children, I can do what I want. I'm big enough, but at the end of the day, they're going to come crying and screaming back to mommy or daddy, when they're scared of the dark.
Right.
Right. So there's this rebelliousness that clamors for freedom of choice, but it's all really a facade, because scratch the surface a little bit, and and almost all of them want nothing more than to have comfort, to have security, to have good, orderly direction.
God. Right.
God. Yeah. To have some idea of what to do so that the onus doesn't fall on them.
The choice.
Yeah,
the free choice.
The free choice.
And we can't handle it. You can't handle the truth.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of... Yeah, and then I think the first flag that he says that Jesus denied, I believe, was the idea of bread.
Yeah, he talks about heavenly bread and earthly bread. I don't know, I could probably dig into that, but Jesus went the heavenly bread route. He's saying like you don't need the earthly bread. All that stuff, he said
the wants and needs.
What is it? I'm in the world, but I'm not of the world, or maybe I've got it backwards.
Right.
So he had this, not of this world. You see that on people's bumper sticker,
Right.
Right. It's this idea that I'm a spiritual being having a human experience.
Right.
There's this call to maybe a heaven on earth of almost another
dimension,
another realm.
Yeah.
That is the important realm.
Right.
And
the most holy realm.
And there's, I think that even a lot of spiritual disciplines, eventually they get to a place where they say that this realm is unreal. Right.
Right.
It's an illusion.
Right.
They call it Maya in one of the Eastern traditions. This idea that it's all illusory, it's all temporary, it's not eternal, and there's an eternal truth which goes beyond what we can conceive of, what we can taste, touch, see, feel. All of that stuff is ephemeral. All of that stuff is temporary, and it's not the real truth.
But the Grand Inquisitor said that's where you were wrong.
Yeah.
You should have done the earthly bread.
Yeah.
What you actually need.
Yeah.
Food, shelter,
Let's get real.
security, right? Like the predators outside. We need to be able to like be safe and comfort.
Yeah.
And that goes into Nietzsche, the herd mentality.
They want the comfort, but it's also, it cuts two ways with Nietzsche, because Nietzsche would also say that this idea of putting a lot of stock in what's not really happening, of trying to, there's this one, what is it? Philosophy is the most spiritual will to power. It is the tyrannic urge itself. And with these mystics and these sages and these saints, that really what they're after is they're trying to they're trying to lord their power over reality itself by denying reality as it is.
That's a really good breakdown, I think, of that view of the philosophy as being like the ultimate will to power.
Yeah.
So the Grand Inquisitor makes that distinction of where Jesus made a major...
You went heavenly bread instead of earthly bread. People really need earthly bread. You should have given it to them.
And that's the first flag. It's like, okay, first you get them with the earthly bread. This is what you should have done. You get them with the earthly bread. You give them the emperor, right? You give them the physical manifestation of an emperor, one God, all united under one. And then you move into you can actually take the earthly bread away and replace it with giving them a purpose.
Yeah, or he talks about a conscience.
A conscience.
That you satisfy their conscience. Yeah. which then lends itself, into a purpose, is the idea that even a man with all the bread in the world, given no reason, Nietzsche also said, like, what is it? A man with a how can bear almost any why.
Right.
Yeah, so that really what people want is a purpose and something to live for. And if they don't have that, even if they have all the earthly bread in the world,
all the money, property, and
they'll
prestige,
burn it down.
Yeah. They'll go crazy.
They'll kill themselves,
they'll kill
essentially.
Themselves. Right.
Yeah, so give them that, and you really have the keys to the kingdom of controlling people. And his argument is that people need to be controlled.
Right.
Because, what he says is that, okay, Christ, you're one thing. And maybe he makes this argument, which is, I imagine you had some pretty devout followers as well.
Yeah.
Maybe
The
tens
disciples.
of thousands of followers.
Yeah. 100,000, I think it gets to. Right?
But it's still a rounding error on the hundreds or thousands of millions of, generations of others who are that.
He calls babes.
Babes.
Babes, like the babes.
Who would be what Nietzsche would refer to as the herd.
The herd, right.
Yeah.
And that 100,000 of true devout followers are going to take the freedom on. They're going to take the burden on of making these choices for the babes. And by doing that, he's continuing Jesus's unfinished work that he did wrong anyways. And they're taking the reins now, and they're burning the heretics, and this is why you're the number one heretic.
And I wonder, would the Grand Inquisitor place himself in that 100,000?
Yes.
Yeah.
100. He'd be the top of the 100,000.
Yeah.
Or in
he
the
would
top
almost
10.
And he mentioned that of those who were, real believers or real followers, or who were, made of something different than the masses, he said most of them will get impatient. Over time, they will become disillusioned, and they will find something else to follow because you don't come back. And
eventually they'll whittle down. But then there's a weird move towards the end where he talks about how the beast, even so, the devil, the unholy spirit of the earth, will come
lick his feet.
Lick his feet.
Yeah.
Lick his feet.
Yeah. He makes the argument to Christ that that Christ is doing a very unloving thing to the majority of people
because they can't,
by trying to foist freedom upon them when they not only don't want it, they literally cannot handle it. And he had the ability to take that freedom away from them.
And he should have.
And he should have. And, you know, we were talking about this earlier. One interesting framing of it is that Christ had an opportunity to step up to the plate, and Christ bitched out.
Yeah, he failed miserably.
He's like, nah. You know, it's just like, at a household, you got to step up to the plate, be the man of the house. And he's like, I'm just going to, you know, I'm not going to accept the responsibility. And what the Grand Inquisitor is saying is that we did that. You know, we bore the burden of freedom
for the last 1,500 years
for them, so that
in your name,
in
Christ's name, yeah.
And we lied to them and said that it was in your name, and that lie was also a burden that we bore. You know,
wow.
We had to carry the weight of lying to the world and saying it was in your name, and of assuming freedom for them so that they could benefit from having what they really need, which is a lack of freedom. Another way of putting that is purpose.
Right.
You know, it's interesting that those are two different framings of what could arguably be a very similar thing. One is a lack of freedom and slavery, and the other one is direction and purpose. An ox has a lot of direction and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Does it not?
It does.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's to carry a load.
But it's also very stupid, right?
Mm-hmm.
As far as...
And his argument would be, so are we.
Right.
Yeah.
We're right there with them.
Mm-hmm.
And how dare you, like using your words, foist this freedom, this unreal expectation on the masses.
Yeah.
They cannot handle it whatsoever. And they will destroy themselves, and they already have. Like, look at the ones that are, you know, not in the flock yet, because our work is still working,
mm-hmm.
right? Look at the fractions that have broken off. You know, there's a part in the beginning of it where he talks about that bright star in the church and how it's polluted the water, mm-hmm. and that's Lutheranism, because Lutheranism is, and we talked about this, the 99 Thesis. It's this kind of. It's almost like this attempt to go back to like what people interpreted Jesus would have wanted, where you could like read the good word yourself and
a direct relationship with it. It's not arbitered by the
right.
priest.
Like you might not even
pope.
have to go to church, really. You could just read the good book,
mm-hmm.
and like, you know, maybe with like a Bible study or something, and get you know it in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like and get that love and that purpose. But
what the Grand Inquisitor would say is like, that's cute.
That's cute,
yeah,
right? That's what he said. But he also calls it a poison.
But you know what you think is this direct relationship you want to have with God is just a relationship with a master,
right?
And what God really wants, you know, what Christ would have had for you is to have true freedom of choice,
right?
And to have no master,
right?
And the onus is totally on you,
completely.
Yeah, and that's what you Lutherans think with your little 99 Thesis is that's what you're going for,
right?
You know.
But they do call it a poison in the story,
mm-hmm.
and it's not the Grand Inquisitor that does. It's
it's setting up the story.
It's
right?
setting
That's
up the story.
Ivan.
But Ivan is saying that, yeah. Right? He's saying that there's this because he's on. It's almost like his dark secret is that he really doesn't believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do? You think he's right?
I mean, I kind of view Ivan. I do. It's like, do you have?
Is the Grand Inquisitor right? If Jesus came back,
it's a rationalist argument.
It's rationalist to its full end.
Yeah,
to
its full end. I don't think you can disagree with it. I mean, maybe you could. But even Ivan. I mean, he's a bit of a rascal. You know.
Yeah.
He's. You know, there's like a jester-like quality to it.
Well, he comes up in the story. He says something when there's a dispute with the father and the other brother, mm-hmm. right? And he comes in and he's talking to the monks because, you know, back then the way you would settle things is the monks would be your kind of
like a rabbi, or
like
something.
You go in and it's called something, but you have a family dispute.
They decide this is what's going to happen,
and he comes in kind of hot on one, kind of defending his brother, but kind of not. And he's so pissed off that his brother wants to kill his father, and they all want to kill his father. I mean, his father's like the worst of the worst, but. he goes, anything and everything is permissible. Everything is justified.
Which makes its way into this story.
It makes its way into the story, and it's an appalling realization to Alyosha. He that's the one part where Alyosha kind of calls him out a little bit. That's where he gets a little bit more rational and kind of has more concrete, like, do you really believe anything is justified? Like, you can just go and murder and cheat and steal and because there's no God, you really do believe that in your heart of hearts, deep down inside. How miserable must you be? You know, and that's probably one of the best little, tiny comebacks.
I mean, I think that Ivan, right, at the end of the story, he basically says, I'll see you later, right? I'm going to go off and I'm going to live my everything is permissible lifestyle.
Right.
But even he's conceding defeat by saying, I'll be back once
I've chased the glass to the bottom.
Yeah. Once I reach the end of my rope, and in a similar way with the Grand Inquisitor leaving the door open.
Yeah. So
right?
we can finish the story.
Yeah.
So he charges Jesus with all
this
things.
Stuff. I'm going to kill you tomorrow.
Yeah. And this is why.
At the end of it, Jesus doesn't say a single thing. He just looks at him with this repose, this peaceful look. And then he approaches the Grand Inquisitor and he kisses him on the lips, which puts a shudder through him, right?
Right.
If my memory serves me
right.
No,
yeah. He gets like this shudder. Yeah.
And then the Grand Inquisitor leaves.
Opens it with the cell door open.
And he walks away
to leave.
He leaves the door open.
And don't come back. You can leave, but don't ever come back.
Yeah, but he has mercy on him.
That's interesting because the Grand there's another part where the Grand Inquisitor, it stays with that feeling that he got from the kiss from Jesus. It stays with him. It doesn't go. The story ends because an Alyosha kind of jumps in and the poema is over. But there's this subtle move where he gets kissed, he gets the shudder, and then he goes, leave and don't come back. But there's a passage that says that it kind of stayed with him. That kiss stayed with him. So it's almost like maybe that little kiss, that little goodness, still can overcome.
It is
this argument.
You know what I was thinking about? I think that the Grand Inquisitor's argument is foolproof. It's just gnarly.
It's way gnarly.
But I was just thinking about this before we came into the podcast room. We were out there in your kitchen preparing our tea, and your dogs came up to us. And Eva, your girl.
Yeah.
She's an old girl.
Good old girl.
And I had a moment with her where I'm petting her head.
Yeah.
She comes up to me. She wants a little bit of attention, a little bit of love.
Right.
And we discussed that she's riddled with cancer.
Right.
That she needs chemotherapy, but really, what's the point?
Right.
And there's this quiet recognition that her days are numbered.
Oh, yeah.
And that it's just heartbreaking.
Right. You're trying to make me cry right now. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I've known this for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's, I had another experience like this the other day where I was coming home from work. I live in an apartment complex, and I was trying to get in, and there was a man who was getting out of his car, and he had a walker, a lot like my dad had a walker near the end of his life.
Right.
And there was a bit of a younger woman who was helping him, and he was trying to, he saw me coming. He wanted to be patient to let me go around. I wanted to let him do his thing, and ultimately we crossed paths, and we had a moment where I said, have a good night. And he was an old dog too.
Right.
And his days were numbered. And there was a very heartfelt human exchange that happened. And that's like the kiss, And that all of the rational arguments, all of the other stuff, it kind of all crumbles with that kiss.
That one human love.
Just that love, that compassion.
Right. Just that little bit.
Dostoyevsky's really good at that.
Right.
He's really good at continuing to refer to that beautiful, but there's a great, God, man, I don't know if I can look it up. There's a great Dostoyevsky quote that Dostoyevsky. It's something very simple. It's just like, I think he says, "This is my last message to you. In sorrow, seek happiness."
Right. Which it's perfect because in the story, So we explained the exchange between the Grand Inquisitor Jesus letting him go. He gets the kiss. It's kind of moves him to a certain extent where he lets Jesus go. But also at the end of the departing of Alyosha and his brother, they have an exchange that's very similar. Alyosha stands up right after the kind of the craziness, gives his brother a kiss on the lips, and in the story, it's not a story of a story, it's the story. And then they walk outside and they still talk a little bit, and the atheist goes left and the God loving one goes right. And that's on purpose. That's on purpose. And then Alyosha notices his brother has kind of a hunch on his left shoulder, but not a hunch. He doesn't. He's a good-looking guy actually. But he's got this kind of, it's this burden on him, and he's got this swivel to his walk that's just a little off that he's never noticed before. And then the other thing that Alyosha says, it's almost like the two arguments infect each other, like what we were talking about with the chaos and order thing. They taught each other something, right? Because Alyosha reflects on that and says that moved him, and he reflects on that argument throughout his life, and he feels like something has changed or was altered in him just a little bit. He doesn't lose his faith. He keeps with the God and everything like that, right? But it was such a compelling argument that it's like duly noted. You know what I mean? Like, okay, all right, maybe I gotta open my eyes up a little bit more, and not be so blinded. So go ahead.
The quote is, "This is my last message to you. In sorrow, seek happiness." And it's from the brothers Karamazov. It doesn't, it's, to me, I don't know where I came across it. I think Claire included it in like a letter she wrote to me years ago, looked it up, but I thought it was sweet. This is my, like, out of everything, Dostoyevsky, who's written volumes upon volumes.
Oh man.
Like, what does it all boil down to?
Right.
What is my final message?
What's the end? Yeah. What's going on here?
In sorrow,
right,
seek happiness.
Right. And that ties into his losing his kid too. Yeah. Because that's madness. I mean, that's like the ultimate tragedy, really. And you're not supposed to die before your kid's not supposed to die before the I mean, obviously it happens, but I'm just saying.
I think there's a good argument, which is that even if the Grand Inquisitor is wrong at the end of the day,
he's still right.
There's like the naivety argument, which is that doing the right thing, if you're too innocent, it's just naivety. It's just cowardice. It's different than really doing the right thing because you've been put to the test.
Right.
And even goodness, if it hasn't properly contended with, for lack of a better term, the rational atheist argument, it hasn't been, it's just the admixture's not right yet. It needs to confront that. We need to confront that.
Yeah, and one other thing that I'm thinking through, and it's a hard thing to think through, because I think of he talks about the glass, chasing the glass to the floor, and they talk a lot about in the book about delirium tremens, and but he never I don't know if the word had ever been put to paper, alcoholic, right? But it's almost like alcoholics, like maybe turning this into sobriety, but alcoholics of our nature, right? Drug addicts and alcoholics are literally atheism's end. What do you think of that? I mean, because it's like anything's permissible, everything's justified, right? That's the self-will run riot on steroids. I mean, most people are on self-will, right? We all recognize that, but the alcoholic and the drug addict is an extreme example of self-will run riot, right? That's a concept that we adhere to and we relate to, right? And to the point where you become kind of the madman where everything's permissible, and so that can only exist in a godless world. What do you think about that? Do you gotta?
I know I was gonna see if I could find something, but I don't know if I'll be able to. I mean, in the 12-step scene, it's all the antidote for the issue, which is powerlessness, which is hopelessness, which is unmanageability.
Right.
Is finding a higher power.
Finding order, good orderly direction.
A power by which we can live.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that without that, it's having something to live for.
Right. And maybe it's Alyosha,
and it's having a God to live for.
Right. And Alyosha's, the change in him is to have compassion for the atheist, almost. Like at first he's appalled. Like, how could you believe this? And then he goes, he realizes like, oh my God, you actually believe this shit. Like, you're living your life. This is your good orderly direction. This is your false deity, right? It is abhorrent, and it's going to give you madness and death. Like he says, like, and he assures him. That's the other thing. He assures him at the end that he doesn't. His admittance of love to Alyosha is the assurance that he won't commit suicide.
Say that again, or
so his love, his admitting to Alyosha that he loves him as a brother.
Ivan admits to
Ivan admits to Alyosha,
I love you as a brother.
I love you, like I love you, and take that admission of love that you're gonna keep, like, because you believe basically I'm not gonna kill myself, and then when I'm done doing my shenanigans, I'm gonna come find you in 7 or 30 years.
But it's your assurance that I'm not going to kill myself because I tell you that I love you.
Yes. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And then Alyosha, it's almost like Alyosha. It's like you got to take pity on that motherfucker because he's a sick bastard.
Alyosha or Ivan.
Alyosha thinks that. Like, it opens him up a little bit. Like, okay, I can't be so appalled by this rationalist atheistic argument. I have to.
Do you identify more with Ivan or Alyosha?
Ivan.
Do you?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I actually identify more with the second brother, Dmitri, because he just follows his passions. He's almost like another version of Ivan, but Ivan's just more collected. He's more rational, I guess. But I relate to depravity and chasing the glass to the floor. There's something inside of me that wants to do that. There's a rebel inside of me.
There's something about Alyosha that's a bit naive, that's a bit green, that's a bit idealistic.
You're right.
It's a bit shallow.
I don't know if it's because you got to understand his character.
And again, I've only read
right. His character is literally trained by the monk is going to die, and so Alyosha goes to his death after this conversation. But this monk is like. I mean, there's some critiques in his book about how he portrayed the monks, in the story, because it was kind of known that Dostoyevsky didn't really like monks that much, right? He kind of thought they were kind of fools, but he respected the doctrine. And this Alyosha has been trained under like a Jedi fucking master when it comes to the good way, the Christian way, right? Like he is the guy, his story, the monk's story that dies. I can't. His name slips my head, but he's a big part in the book. His story is so insane. There's a whole other avenue how that goes, and he really is a true believer, and he really is a good man. And he's got a couple little flaws. Look how he likes candy and sweets and like attention from women, but he never goes and like depraves himself and goes on these benders or anything like that. He's a real monk, right? And he's really spreading the message of God, and Alyosha's been like his foot soldier, right? And he loves him. He loves him more than almost his father, but he still loves his father. So Alyosha is like the real deal. Like he really is. Like he is naive. He is green for sure. I think that sense you get from him is that but he's really the real deal.
We have this, I think, feeling that whether you're Christ or whether you're the Grand Inquisitor, you need to have the 40 nights in the desert or the 40 days.
Yeah, that's something. They both do it. They both go through kind of like hell on earth, right?
Why do we need to go through hell on earth? Why can't we just?
I mean, it's the madman in Nietzsche too. It's like it's. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's this idea that good can't exist without evil, right? Like if it was just all good, it would just be like hymns and songs all day long and skippity doo dah.
Yeah. And that's one of the things he says. That's a way of looking at when it comes to good and evil and opposites. When he talks about these three questions, the three temptations. For in these three questions, all of subsequent human history is as if brought together into a single whole and foretold. Three images are revealed that will take in all the insoluble historical contradictions of human nature over all the earth. But just this can't, maybe we need to have evil because without evil we wouldn't have good.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the yin and the yang kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're the opposite side of the same hand.
Mm-hmm. But what if there was something that could cut through that?
Right. Some question that could just get to the bottom of it all. The root.
Yeah. Which is what the rationalist argument
is trying to do. But he never does.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe that's where
It never really does, and at the end of it, it's all just toppled by one kiss.
One kiss.
Yeah.
Just destroys the atheist.
Doesn't argue back at all. Doesn't actually disagree.
No.
Even.
Yeah. That's what's so radical about his writing is that there's not an argument. Like Alyosha, his reaction is like, like a
Alyosha disagrees.
He's not trying to. Yeah, he disagrees, but he's not.
Ivan actually doesn't disagree with his own argument in his writing of the poem by the way he represents Jesus.
Right. Yeah.
Jesus doesn't react the way Alyosha reacts.
Right. Yeah, because maybe that's he's still. You're talking about two characters that are like in their early 20s.
Yeah.
They're not like wise sage dudes that have been through a lot of they've gone through experience, but not, you know what I mean, they're not like wise. And so Alyosha's greenness is appalled, but Alyosha, I would think in 10 years would take that argument with some deprived alcoholic talking him through, trying to get him to get off the sauce, and get sober or whatever, find God. He would probably change, like he would probably give the kiss and the hug. Right. I think
not
Alyosha's
to disagree, not to go like, I was there one day and to scoff.
Yeah.
And just wait for them to finish.
Right.
But to really be like, yeah.
And that's probably what we need.
That's all right.
Yeah, we need to have that true connection, that non-judgmental connection, and that one kiss topples the whole fucking thing down. Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah. That's a pretty cool place to end, don't you think?
I think so.
So I guess that's all we got.
All right.
We believe in God still. Nice try, Dostoyevsky.
That's right.
All right.
Have a good night.
Good night.